Episode 9, The Greenhouse Jungle, first aired on October 15th, 1972. It was written by Jonathan Latimer, born 1906 in Illinois. Latimer did quite a lot of writing for the Perry Mason TV series and tried to retire after that. But Jackson Gillis, the writer for Suitable for Framing and Short Fuse, was the one who, for just a moment, took Jonathan Latimer out of retirement to write Greenhouse Jungle. And before ever becoming a writer, Latimer was a crime reporter covering Al Capone. This episode of Colombo was his final writing credit. The director was Boris Sagal, born 1923 in Ukraine. He directed a few episodes of Johnny Staccato, Mike Hammer, Peter Gunn, and another future Columbo episode. This episode begins very dark and scary in the night, looking at a large and rich house. They're always rich. A phone begins to ring and the light turns on. We see a huge alarm clock reading 12:53 a.m. I notice that there is a piece of black tape here covering up the brand name of this clock, which is Sony. This is similar to the black tape covering the name Harley-Davidson on the golf carts in Short Fuse.
Hello?
This is Tony Goodland.
Who is this?
Your old man, he just bought himself some trouble.
Wait a minute. That kind of sounds like Ray Milland.
If he pays up, no hard feelings. If he don't, we'll be in touch with you.
Why, it is Ray Milland. What's he doing with that handkerchief?
What is this?
Yeah, what is this? Who put this thought in our heads that covering the transmitter of a phone distorts your voice? Although, it did work in Police Squad.
Hello?
Hello, Sally. This is Dr. Zabatsky.
I need to talk to you. I have the money right here.
Fresh from the mint. Traceable.
Yeah, okay, you win.
Corner of Cherry and Galena.
Well, the lady hangs up and hollers for husband Tony.
Tony!
Oh, looks like Tony has his own room, with 4 different paintings of pipe smokers. And a Buddha figure? She goes back to her own room and opens a desk drawer. Whoa, and she just leaves her gun free floating with the paperwork and address book. Practically as harmless as a stapler. As she starts dialing a phone number, the camera pans over to a framed photo of, well, it's signed Kathy Love. Love Tony. So I guess this is Tony. But wait a second. That picture wasn't facing towards us earlier. It must have followed her as she walked across the room. Anyway, the call goes through to a grape-eating lady reading a book called Relaxing Your Mind.
Whom?
Mrs. Tony Goodland. And if my husband is there, Miss West, I'd like to speak with him.
Well, he certainly is not. I was at one time Mr. Goodland's receptionist.
I know all about your skills at the office. Just tell me where Tony is.
Well, I don't know where he is.
And then this lady glances over and we see another framed picture. This time, signed Gloria Love, Love Tony. At first, it seems these are the same photos, signed by Tony for reasons I do not understand, but they are actually slightly different from each other. In Gloria's, he is smiling, but he is a little more serious than Kathy's. The picture frames are identical, though. Then Mrs. Goodland begins dialing another number. Oh, they're quite the porcelain statues above her bed. It reminds me of the ones Beth Chadwick had in her bedroom. You know, I should probably go ahead and introduce Kathy Goodland. She's played by Sandra Smith, born 1938 in Minnesota. She was in several episodes of Our Private World and The Interns. She was also in the final episode of Star Trek The Original Series, where her character forcibly switches bodies with Captain Kirk so she can command the Enterprise. Back to her second phone call.
Jarvis, I'm looking for Tony.
Tell me, my dear, have you tried your own home?
Jarvis, look, I got a weird phone call a couple of minutes ago.
Oh. Sounds quite lethal, doesn't he?
These people sure stay up late around here. So Jarvis tells her to go ahead and contact the police.
Oh, and Kathy, assuming nothing is wrong with Tony, it's been my pleasure to hear you so upset.
Why do you always have to talk to her like she was some kind of a...
Well, isn't she?
What is going on here? Tony seems just fine.
Why do you insist upon being in love with a wife who spends all your cash on some skiing instructor?
Then he takes out of the drawer a gun of his own and points it at Tony. Looks like he's not just fine anymore.
This whole thing better work. It just better work, that's all.
Oh, it'll work. I planned it. And now let's be off to conclude phase 1, shall we, nephew?
Oh. Okay, then. Well, these two get into separate cars and head off to their destination as the credits start rolling. It is still called rolling, isn't it? Even though they aren't rolling? They walk into what seems to be a hunting cabin or something and start discussing their plan. Tony will be making 2 different phone calls, one to Kathy and one to Jarvis at a gas station.
Boo. It's gonna feel like Halloween wearing this thing.
Is that what you wear for Halloween, Tony?
Now, don't forget to wear these. We don't want some clod trying to match footprints.
Jarvis asks where the letter is, and Tony takes out an envelope saying he copied it word for word from the draft. Then over the radio, they hear what they were waiting for.
Driving yellow sports car, chrome spoke wheels, license ZZ0324. Report if subject located.
We're in business.
The voice delivering the police report might be recognizable if you've watched all the episodes. It's Lucille Meredith, who we will one day meet in 2 future Columbo episodes.
And now, dear nephew, to phase 2.
I like how Jarvis is trying really hard to be a villain by labeling their actions as phases. By the way, in case you haven't watched all of my videos up to this point, Jarvis is, like I said, played by Ray Milland, born 1907 in Wales, UK, and we met him already back in Season 1 during Death Lends a Hand.
Jarvis, couldn't we just hide the Jag? That thing cost me a bundle.
Did it cost you $300,000?
And this odd little fella, Tony, is played by Bradford Dillman, born 1930 in California. We've got yet another Escape from the Planet of the Apes actor. He won a Golden Globe for the film In Love and War, and Dillman was also in every episode of the TV series Court Martial and King's Crossing, as well as a few episodes of the FBI, Barnaby Jones, and Murder, She Wrote, where he ended his acting career and became a writer. Well, they get back into their cars and start heading to the location of Phase 2. Since we're driving again, let's go ahead and identify these cars. Tony is driving a 1962 Jaguar XKE FHC. It's an older model of Alex Benedict's Jaguar from Etude in Black. Now, Jarvis's car is a 1959 Bentley S2 Continental 2-door saloon by H.J. Mulliner. I noticed something between this scene and the scene before it, though. The license plate is different. Here it looks like it reads PTP 630, but before it was 455QQH. I also am questioning if that driver is Ray Milland. I'm kinda thinking it's not. Also, while this scene is playing, we'll mention our composer of the entertaining and memorable score, Oliver Nelson, born 1932 in Missouri. He mainly composed music for Ironside and The $6 Million Man. Oliver will be responsible for the music of one more Columbo episode. Now they arrive. Jarvis gets out and tells Tony to turn off the headlights, turn the dashboard clock to 12:18, and put the window up.
Emergency brake off?
Yes.
Would you mind?
Jarvis waves the gun back and forth with his finger on the trigger. Don't do that. Ever. And he shoots the window and begins to push the car.
But don't just stand there, push!
Tony makes some weird pushing faces, and there goes the car down into the canyon, along with the budget for this episode. This scene of the yellow Jaguar rolling down into the canyon and turning on its side also appears in 2 different episodes of Barnaby Jones. One of them being the episode Murder Once Removed, but that reference isn't quite as interesting as the other episode called Image in a Cracked Mirror, which also stars Bradford Dillman. As you can see, the footage is from a different angle, but it is the same event.
Come on. End of a perfect day.
This episode of Barnaby Jones with Bradford Dillman wasn't really that interesting, but maybe I was in a bad mood or something. Although, I laughed and laughed at the final chase scene, and I wanted to share Dillman's work with you really quick. So to start off, there's the swift thinking with the luggage cart to gently block Barnaby. The karate kick that disarms and incapacitates the policeman. Look at him still on the ground back there. And this purposefully getting hit by a car thing. Finally, him getting shot and rolling down the stairs is just... yeah. A karate kick gets me every time, though. I think it was that policeman's first time drawing his gun, too. Anyway, if you take a good look at the bumper before it's rolled down the hill, and then as it goes down, the front part of the bumper is suddenly missing. Now it's the next day, and we have a couple police cruisers at the scene of the accident. Sometimes I'll have a look at Columbophile's blog to get some location tips. I know a lot of you are familiar with columbophile.com. It's a website loaded with Colombo thoughts and lists and all sorts of stuff that will surely entertain you. But according to him, this road is Commonwealth Canyon Drive. It seems to line up pretty well. There isn't a drop-off on the side. It's more like a golf course. But there is an area for cars to pull over, and the little curve around the hill there. This could be it. Typically, I like to find locations on my own because not everything listed on Columbophile is an accurate spot, but it oftentimes does lead me in the right direction. So I'm thankful to him for putting that map together. I like to use signs, businesses, and buildings when looking for locations, but of course there aren't any here. And here comes Colombo. And some ambitious cop tells him to keep going down the road and get out of here.
I'm a cop, sir.
Right, you're a cop. Now, look, can you back this up and move it down the hill with the rest of the
you don't
traffic?
understand.
I understand. Look.
Lieutenant, officer, right now.
Lieutenant?
This police officer that was put in his place is played by Richard Annis, born 1941 in Minnesota. His 1-year-long acting career consisted of Night Gallery, The Jimmy Stewart Show, The Bold Ones, The New Doctors, and this episode of Columbo. Columbo begins searching his pockets for a light, and this fella leading him to the scene offers to light a cigar for him.
May I?
And I love this moment, watching Columbo try to hurry and get it lit while looking up at the man who is extremely serious and intense about getting this done. By the way, this is the first episode where Columbo appears before the murder was actually committed. Unless you want to count the TV movie Prescription Murder, where the victim dies later from murderous injuries. So they go over to where there are 2 different sets of skid marks.
Well, the smaller vehicle is the vehicle that descended into the canyon. Here, I'll show you the quickest way down.
The camera angle changes to look up at Columbo with a concerned expression on his face. He figures he'll go ahead and take this quick route suggested by the man.
Lieutenant?
It's a little steep, but I'll tell you, it was the quickest way down.
Why does nobody ask if Columbo's all right? The stunt is very impressive and makes you want to re-watch it because you start questioning if that really was Peter Falk, since typically actors don't do their own stunts, because if they get hurt or something, then that delays production and all the mess that goes along with that. Although, Peter Falk knows all about delaying productions. But this famously unforgettable scene was truly written to be similar to how it played out, although Falk turned it into something much grittier than it would have been, whether intentional or not. The script went something like this. So the descent looks unnervingly steep. Wilson is skipping and sliding down like a gazelle, not offering to help Columbo. He stops halfway down to look up at Columbo and waits for him. Then Columbo begins heading down the slope, but begins to pick up speed as though he had been pushed, and unintentionally flies past Wilson in an uncontrollable slide, saying, "A little steep," as he passes by Wilson. Then suddenly the camera cuts to the floor of the canyon with Columbo on the ground, eyes glazed, saying, "The quickest way down, all right." So yes, this was intended to be a stunt of some kind. Peter Falk asked to do the stunt himself. As you could see, he didn't have time to deliver his halfway point line of "little steep" as he passed Wilson. This first part of his descent was zoomed in during post-production, and a portion of the zoomed-in bit was repeated after being zoomed out to lengthen the stunt, which I appreciate. Even through this arm-flailing stunt, Peter Falk held on to his cigar till the end. Very impressive. Well, they get to the car, and Columbo starts to inspect it. Having another look at the front of the Jaguar, the bumper is completely gone, as well as the windshield is missing. And in general, the car seems more beat up than what we originally saw. Also, we saw it land in a very brushy area, whereas now the car is in more of an open spot.
Soil moisture tests beneath subject vehicle indicate residual dew, indicating in turn that subject vehicle has been here since last night.
I always find the residual dew line funny. Nobody says residual dew, except I do now.
Bullet hole in window on driver's side, but no blood. Guess I don't have to tell you what this all adds up to.
Yes, you should tell me.
He basically then describes exactly how Jarvis intended for the police to conclude the situation, with Tony being halted by a shot and forced out of the car, and his car pushed into the canyon.
That jibe with your thinking, sir?
I was wondering, could you tell me your name?
Detective Sergeant Frederick Wilson, sir. Please forgive my rudeness.
No, that's perfectly all right.
Sergeant Wilson is played by Bob Dishy, born 1934 in New York. He was the star of I Wonder Who's Killing Her Now, which was very poorly rated. He also appeared in a Mrs. Colombo episode, which should never have existed. He was also an author, Critical Condition, Jungle to Jungle, and Judy Berlin. We will get to see him in one more Colombo episode. Sergeant Wilson then shares with Colombo his resume.
1 year's experience homicide, 2 years advanced police school, Berkeley. Returned the city, homicide, 6 July.
Yes, well, you're a very efficient officer, I can see that.
Wilson says with permission from Captain Ritchie, he's going to work right alongside Colombo.
You're gonna work along with me?
Captain Ritchie did say you were fast becoming a legend in the department.
Oh, Captain Ritchie said that?
Colombo asks Sergeant Wilson for a pocket knife and to hold his coat for him. Colombo maneuvers through where the windshield once was in order to retrieve the bullet.
Captain Ritchie, he said that?
About you? Oh, repeatedly, sir.
What a funny shot. Trying to get some angle varieties in here or something. Colombo then digs the bullet out of the seat and hands it to Wilson to send to the crime lab. If you watch, Colombo's coat will teleport from Wilson's right arm to his left arm and back. Wilson then begins to sheepishly ask if Colombo minds that Captain Ritchie assigned him to work with Colombo, even though he wasn't consulted about it first.
No, Freddie, that's perfectly all right. Captain Ritchie's a very fine administrator, and I'm sure he just wanted to expose me to some modern techniques. No, I appreciate that.
Oh, Lieutenant.
Yes.
Your coat.
Oh.
Now we are at Kathy Goodland's house, and Jarvis is over visiting about how weak Tony is and how much money Kathy spends. But then the doorbell rings.
Mr. Goodland, Police Department, ma'am, Lieutenant Colombo.
Well, I've already told your people everything I know, Lieutenant.
Ma'am, you see, this time I've got something to tell you.
She reluctantly lets him in and introduces Tony's Uncle Jarvis to Colombo. Colombo says he's sorry, but they found her husband's car in a canyon off Middle Cross Road. Kathy fails to have an appropriate reaction to this news, which makes Colombo pause for a moment and then continues.
Smashed up pretty badly, I'm afraid. Kind of a long drop off that particular spot. Even worse, we found a bullet hole in the window on the driver's side.
Kathy continues to have a bored look on her face.
You already heard this?
No.
She was really that unaware of her lack of expression during this terrible news.
Kind of seems to me that if somebody popped in and told my wife that they found my car at the bottom of a canyon with a bullet hole in it, I think that she would want to ask if I was in the car, or if I was hurt, if I was alive, if I was dead.
Jarvis finally pipes up and says, yes, we are actually aware of what you're telling us. Kathy then lets Colombo know that she got a letter from Tony and that he's perfectly all right.
How big a ransom did the letter ask for, ma'am?
You already knew.
Colombo says no, but letters to wives and relatives saying don't talk to the police usually involve a kidnapping.
The way I could just barely get into the house here, just not right here at the door. Well, I make these small observations. I can't help it, ma'am, sometimes.
Colombo asks to see the ransom letter, and Kathy says he can't because the letter says not to give the police any information.
I will do nothing to endanger the safety of your husband. But this is a crime. This is a police matter.
Kathy explains she already sent the letter to the bank to verify Tony's handwriting.
The letter asks for $300,000 in small, unmarked bills.
$300,000 is the same ransom amount in Ransom for a Dead Man. With inflation, today, at the end of 2022, that amount is worth $2,138,842. It's only been around a year since I made my Ransom for a Dead Man review, where I mentioned the dollar value too, and inflation has increased that value by $144,800 since then. I think we have a problem.
$300,000? Well, that's a lot of money.
Colombo asks if Kathy has access to that kind of money, and she explains that she doesn't have it, but Tony has a trust fund that was set up by his father, and it can be broken for emergency situations like this. Jarvis, Tony's uncle, is co-administrator with the bank and is needed to complete the necessary paperwork. Jarvis leaves to go check on the people at the bank about the handwriting verification.
And Mrs. Goodland, believe me, I understand how concerned you are about your husband, and rest assured, we will do nothing to interfere.
I heard the front door close. I thought you were alone.
Well, who's this guy now?
Who are you?
Lieutenant Colombo.
Ken Nichols, friend of the family's.
Friend of the family's.
You look a little tired. You let me be the watchdog. Fix him a drink or whatever.
No, he was just leaving.
Yes, I was just leaving.
Colombo is certainly ready to get out of this heavily awkward room.
Don't worry, everything's gonna be all right.
Lieutenant.
Have you noticed the outdoor background? What a pretty painting, huh? Now we know Kathy's house is a set piece. Anyway, Kathy gets all huffy before slamming the door in the polite and kind lieutenant's face.
We lead separate lives, and I don't really care what you might be thinking right now. Good day.
Now we see Jarvis getting out of his car, looking very pleased with his surroundings, and then heading for his front door. Jarvis Goodland's house is also not a real house. It is a prop at Universal Studios, originally built for Uncle Tom's Cabin. You'll also find this mansion in The Shaggy Dog, Tammy and the Bachelor, and Harvey. A few other places to watch for it is in You Can't Cheat on an Honest Man, The Black Cat, Son of Dracula, and All That Heaven Allows. And I'm positive you can find it elsewhere. Let me know if you have more sightings of this particular mansion front to share. So Jarvis enters his front door and then immediately enters the greenhouse from outside. Weird. He picks up a potted plant and then hears some rustling behind him.
Oh, excuse me.
Oh, Colombo, you're funny. Are you gonna tell us that you didn't hear that loud bell in this silent room?
One of your men, I believe it was the gardener, he said it was all right if I waited here and...
Colombo says he's never seen so many beautiful flowers in his whole life.
Orchids, Lieutenant.
Colombo says that his wife loves African violets, and he walks over to an orchid to admire it, and Jarvis comes over to tell him how much it's worth.
Its value is approximately $1,200.
Boy, a fella could go broke with a hobby like this,
So this exact moment has become a bit of a meme on the internet, which is hilarious. They're all pretty nerdy, but if you have a nerdy side, then you will most likely find these funny. So a few that I have found have Colombo saying, "Boy, a fella could go broke with a hobby like this," in front of Warhammer miniatures, Gundam figures, Magic the Gathering cards, Criterion Collection, and rolls of yarn. I'm looking forward to more of these. Jarvis says he enjoys talking about his orchids, but instead wants to know why Colombo is here.
Yes, sir, I'm waiting to hear how you made out at the bank.
And to see this, I suppose.
Oh, yes, sir, that's very important. I'd like to keep that for evidence.
I really like how Colombo reads the letter.
Making me write this. Driving in a corner country road. Shot at me. Stopped there. Forced off the road.
Jarvis confirms that the money will be available, and also confirms he wants Colombo to leave.
Yeah, that was a lucky thing, wasn't it? Having
Also, the fact of your being here jeopardizes my nephew's life. Now, supposing we were watched.
Absolutely right. Better run along.
Colombo mumbles quietly that the one or two little things he had can wait, and then he acts like he's about to leave, but of course he doesn't.
It just hit me how much you must love these flowers. With your nephew being kidnapped, and they told me you took the time to stop off at the nursery.
You mean I'm being followed? I'm gonna call up your superiors.
Colombo stops Jarvis and reassures him that they are staying out of it.
I'm to stay in touch, but until your nephew is released, believe me, we're way back.
Yeah, way out.
Huh?
And then Jarvis has a compulsion to say this about his nephew.
He's a wife-ridden weakling whom I've despised for years. If it wasn't for the fact that he's my only relative, I'd call up his captors and tell them that they're welcome to him.
Colombo has no response to that. I don't think I would either. Also, this outdoor background is a painting as well. Back at Kathy and Tony's house, we're counting the money, and Kathy is being comforted by Ken, the family friend. Jarvis is here too. Outside is where we find Colombo with the other officers, and their cover vehicle is a 1971 Chevrolet van with telephone service painted on the side. How clever. Colombo is eating a sandwich. The detective sitting in the passenger seat is Cosmo Sardo, born 1909 in Massachusetts. We met him already during Lady in Waiting at the dress shop, and we will be watching for him in 5 more future episodes. Wilson goes over to Colombo to ask him a question that we have asked and will continue to ask for many days to come.
The boys on the new shift, they keep asking me why a homicide lieutenant has requested to stay on this kidnapping thing. I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
Then Colombo gives a sufficient enough answer.
Are they angry? I hope they're not angry.
The phone rings and Colombo heads over for a listen. The sound man is played by Larry Watson, born 1938 in California. He was in a few episodes of Mannix and Night Gallery.
Yes? Tony, where are you?
Tell Jarvis he's to go to Cal, Texas, gas station, 5835, East Wilshire, public phone booth.
Not to be annoying with my reference to the same Barnaby Jones episode, but Bradford Dillman has to talk painfully on a payphone in that episode too. And again, I just find it really funny.
Give me an ambulance. Please. Hurry. Please.
You know what? I'll just leave a link in the description of this video where you can go watch that episode for free on YouTube if you want to.
Tony, are you all right? Have they hurt you? You sound so...
Then Tony hangs up and has a bit of a sorry face after talking to his wife. The address Tony gives will actually lead you straight to La Brea Tar Pits, but no gas station in sight. Jarvis says he knows that station and figures he might as well get it over with.
What about my going with you, Mr. Goodland?
You?
Sure, I'll hide in the back of the car.
My dear boy, there's one thing I don't need. It's a hero.
Well, Ken, the family friend, is played by William Smith, born 1933 in Missouri. William had a very full career. He started as a child actor, beginning his career in The Ghost of Frankenstein. He was in every episode of The Asphalt Jungle, several episodes of 01, Laredo, Hawaii Five-0, and Rich Man, Poor Man. He was in the films Any Which Way You Can, Conan the Barbarian, The Outsiders, and Red Dawn. He was also a Korean War veteran. Quite a busy fella if you look up his background. Jarvis gets in his car and takes off.
Keep him in sight. No tailgating. Understand?
Yes, sir.
The detective driver is played by Milton Frome, born 1909 in Pennsylvania. He was in the films The Man Who Knew Too Much, Bye Bye Birdie, The Nutty Professor, and Batman. The car he's driving is a 1971 Mercury Monterey Custom. Colombo and the team tail Jarvis, which he is aware of and happy about. He rolls up to the Cal, Texas gas station and gets out of the car. Now, I did find this gas station on the map because of the clear Loyola Theater in the background. This landmark of a building is no longer a theater, as it closed in 1982. Here is the Loyola Theater today. Now it's some sort of medical office. I appreciate that they didn't tear it completely down and that they kept the basic historical architecture of it intact. But if we look across the way, there is our Cal, Texas gas station, which is actually just a 76 gas station. Let's get a little closer. Oh my goodness, has a murder taken place? This looks like a job for Matlock. No, I'm just kidding. There's a hard-working man trying to make a living, and here I am cracking jokes. Sorry, mister. Well, Jarvis strolls over to the payphone, and Tony forgets himself for a second.
It's about time.
Yeah, okay. Take Sunset to Surf Road. You got 15 minutes to get there.
So they all drive down a dirt road and then up a dirt road. Colombo and Wilson get out of the car to observe the money drop. Everyone is right out in the open, trying to be seen. As Colombo keeps his eye on Jarvis's car, Wilson is busy building his camera and is super excited to show Colombo.
Did you ever see one of these before, Lieutenant? It's a camera-mounted starlight scope.
You mean that takes pictures in the dark?
Yeah, I bought this one myself.
You used your own money?
Well, I wanted to have the best equipment for the job, sir.
You must be a bachelor.
That scene is so funny to me. The amount of pride Wilson has in his starlight scope is hilarious. Surely you've met someone like this before who's showing off something they own and they're just ridiculously proud of it. Wilson portrays the little kid in a man's body perfectly. It's just amazing how unaltered Tony's face is with his silk stocking. They needed a darker one or something. Tony grabs the bag and climbs up the hill while Jarvis drives away. I wonder if this here is a large cable for the film crew. Jarvis stops the car and looks around while the detectives stop their car where the ransom drop just took place. Here comes Tony down the hill with his special boots and gets in the trunk.
Lieutenant, we've got some very clear footprints here, going and coming.
Good. We'll have some Moulange cast made. I think we better go.
Wilson suggests they take 3D pictures instead of using moulage cast because when the plaster swells, it changes the size of the footprint.
No kidding.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, then maybe we better take pictures.
Oh, very good.
Yes, as quickly as you can, Sergeant.
Yes, sir.
You can see it all over Colombo's face that he thinks something is wrong with the whole situation and wants to leave this area and move on. The detectives get back on the road and, oh, there's another 76 gas station. Jarvis sees a police light in his rearview mirror and gets a bit concerned. The windshield footage used here is the same as earlier when Jarvis glanced in his mirror. They just switched the superimposed image up in the rearview mirror.
Oh, it's you, Colombo.
Yes, sir. I hope we didn't scare you.
Colombo tries to ask Jarvis some very reasonable questions about the kidnapper, and Jarvis basically refuses to answer anything because he's so rattled or whatever.
I've had a fatiguing and rather frightening evening. Can't this wait until tomorrow?
Yeah, I'm sorry, sir. Have a pleasant night, sir.
I presume that's gallows humor?
Gallows humor is a type of humor that treats serious, frightening, or painful topics in a light, joking, and satirical way. Jarvis rudely drives away, and Wilson is thinking, what's that guy's problem? And Colombo is thinking, that guy is not a very individual person. Jarvis arrives with Tony in the trunk at this old shack where they were earlier. I wonder who owns it. Somebody's got to own it, but it can't be either of these two for obvious reasons. Jarvis lets Tony out of the trunk and apologizes for how long it took.
We had to be sure that Neanderthal policeman wasn't following us.
Well, it was Harry when he stopped you, I'll tell you that.
Well, I'll take the bag.
No, I'll take it.
Tony opens the bag to see the money and gets a little carried away.
Would you look at these lovely green bricks? Beautiful.
Far too beautiful for you to waste your half on that woman.
That woman happens to be my wife, and I want to keep her. Money's what it takes. Money's what she'll have.
Oh, this is kind of tragic now that we know what he wanted the money for. He just wants to hang on to his wife, but he's having some trouble figuring out how to do that.
What a waste. No, Tony, no. The time has now come for me to explain to you Phase 3.
Oh no, not Phase 3. Alright, let's talk about this gun. It is a Colt Model 1903 pocket hammerless, self-loading or semi-automatic pistol. Quite a popular gun in film, a few being The Maltese Falcon, Casablanca, Hickey and Boggs, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and it also shows up in multiple episodes of Mission Impossible during the 60s. But the thing about this scene that doesn't work with this type of gun, but totally works with revolvers, is how closely we get to see it when Jarvis pulls the trigger. But what should have happened when the gun was fired was the slide would move back and a casing would be ejected. If we didn't have such a good look at the gun during this shot, then I probably wouldn't have even said anything about it. And the reason why revolvers work much better for close-up camera work when pretending to shoot is that you can pull the trigger when a revolver is not loaded and the cylinder will still revolve. And revolvers don't eject casings automatically, so it's much easier to convincingly fake it. Also, one more thing about this gun firing, and it happens all the time in Colombo, as well as most older TV shows and movies, is the one-shot kills without aiming. Let's think back. Leslie Williams held her gun up and aimed. Ken Franklin sabered his aiming and got a bullseye. And even though we didn't witness General Hollister shooting Dutton, we do witness him aiming his target pistol. Dale Kingston held his arm out, but it doesn't really look like he aimed, but instead just pointed the gun. Beth Chadwick did not aim, but she did shoot 3 times to make up for it. And we have no idea what Elliot Markham did with his gun. He probably shot point blank since Bo was so obedient at the time. Anyway, 37 minutes into the episode, and we finally have a murder. I think this might be the most belated murder of any Columbo episode. Next day, Jarvis is nonchalantly playing with his plants, and Columbo walks into the greenhouse.
Colombo.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Goodland. I was hoping I'd find you up. Your gardener said I might find you here.
Columbo's gonna get that gardener fired for how much permission he gives Colombo to just walk into Jarvis's greenhouse. Jarvis asks if there's any news on Tony, and Colombo says, nope, not a thing. Jarvis wants to know why Colombo's here then, and Colombo says he was hoping for some advice about something.
My wife has tried everything she knows to get this thing to grow. This African violet here.
That is the most miserable specimen I've ever seen. My only advice to you, Colombo, is to throw it in the trash can.
I was afraid you were going to say that. Listen, as long as I'm here, might as well bring up 1 or 2 little things I didn't get to before.
Colombo brings up the fact that when they found Tony's car, the ignition and the lights were off, and the gear was in neutral.
Perhaps they grabbed Tony and then pushed the car over the side to keep it out of sight, don't you think?
Yeah, that's what it looks like, all right.
Colombo then mentions the first phone call made to Kathy, and Jarvis says, well, that was to make her believe the letter when she got it.
She's a very hard woman to convince of anything, Lieutenant.
I wonder how they knew that. Funny.
Then Colombo brings up the skid marks out on the road, but he interrupts himself.
Say, what is this thing, sir?
That is a multicolored Cattleya bulb from Brazil.
From Brazil? You don't say. Really?
Jarvis tries to get Colombo back on topic.
Skid marks?
Oh, yeah, there were marks of a heavier car on that road, too.
Colombo can't figure out how a heavier car caught up to the Jaguar.
But they took a shot at him, isn't that what he said?
The line of flight of that bullet through the window. Well, that slug would have passed right through him. But it didn't. I mean, nothing.
Well, you see, Tony's been ducking things adroitly for years.
Right. Very good, sir.
And then Colombo brings up a topic that Jarvis was not prepared for.
You've got a gun yourself, haven't you, Mr. Goodland? Also a 32, I think.
Yes. Tony gave it to me. It's around the house somewhere.
Jarvis wants to know if Colombo has been checking up on him. And Colombo says no, he just happened across a police report filed some time ago.
Had to do with somebody breaking into the greenhouse here.
Solarium.
Oh, the solarium, right, I stand corrected.
A solarium is an addition to a house where all the walls and ceilings are entirely made up of glass, and can be comfortable enough to sit down and have a cup of coffee in, if you like. But greenhouses, on the other hand, can also be made from glass, though it's usually thinner, or a thick, transparent plastic, and the only purpose of a greenhouse is to grow plants. No, I did not know anything about solariums before this episode. Colombo continues to sift through papers from his pocket.
I got this telephone bill. I gotta take care of that. Oh, here we are. Here we are.
So, Colombo was immediately established in prescription murder with never having a pencil. But as the series progresses, he begins adding in being distracted by something irrelevant in the room, or has pockets full of papers searching for something that is relevant. I've read that Peter Falk ad-libbed these little things in order to throw off his fellow actors, to get a genuine look of confusion or annoyance from them.
Yeah, I guess a guy broke in and, what happened? You took some pot shots at him or something?
You just happened to run across this report? I did take a couple of shots, but all I had was a pile of dirt over there. I confess.
Confess to what, sir?
To having an unregistered weapon somewhere in the house.
Listen, if I arrested everybody with an unregistered weapon in Los Angeles, believe me, I'd have half the population in jail.
Oh wow, his solarium really does lead right into his house. That makes the scene earlier of him walking into his front door and then entering his solarium from the outside make even less sense.
This is magnificent.
Sure is. We've already learned that Colombo enjoys a game of pool once in a while from the pilot episode, Ransom for a Dead Man. Colombo takes from his pockets those pictures that Wilson took during the ransom exchange.
These were taken with a starlight scope. That's a new camera. It's a very sophisticated instrument.
Where are these pictures taken from?
All the way down at the bottom of the hill. Which is kind of funny, too.
Jarvis wants to know what's kind of funny, too.
The place where they ask you to deliver the ransom. Way up on top of the hill like that. I mean, it's almost as though they wanted to have a place that was exposed in order to be photographed. I'll tell you, in most cases, you don't have any clues. In this case, I got so many clues, they don't know where to start.
Colombo asked Jarvis why the kidnappers requested he deliver the money instead of the wife.
Because they probably knew that if Catherine had that much money in the car, she'd just keep on driving.
I wonder how they knew that.
And the phone rings.
It's for you, Colombo.
Hello. I'll be there as soon as I can. They found your nephew's body. He's been murdered.
Jarvis uses his sad face, and the scene changes to the hunting shack or whatever it is. Wilson summarizes everything he knows so far in bullet point form.
Remove the body, man. Is that all right with you, sir?
This medical examiner man is played by Joseph LaCava, born 1908 in New Jersey. He is one of our actors who took uncredited roles for a living and has shown up in the background of films since 1940. He was good friends with Bud Abbott, so you'll find him in most of the Abbott and Costello movies, like Buck Privates, Ride 'em Cowboy, Hold That Ghost, Whodunit, and you'll also find him in several episodes of The Untouchables, Perry Mason, and The Rogues. I actually forgot to mention him in Murder by the Book, also playing the medical examiner, and we will see him one more time in an upcoming episode.
Move it.
So that head there is supposed to be Tony's? I don't know, unless Jarvis gave him a haircut. Colombo has been very quiet the whole scene and just nodding at Wilson, who feels the need to talk. It is normal for Colombo to quietly inspect the crime scenes, so Wilson is kind of going against the grain here a bit.
As you've probably noticed, there are 3 cups, 3 plates, 3 different brands of cigarettes. That means there were 2 persons here besides the victim. That's obvious.
Awfully obvious.
You know what else should have been awfully obvious was the fact that Tony was wearing the same exact clothes as the guy who came down the hill to get the ransom money. Now we see some tall apartment buildings and find Colombo questioning the woman that Kathy called at the beginning of the episode.
And I'd appreciate it if you would cooperate. Now, why did he come here at night?
His wife played around. So he'd come here and he'd tell her so. He'd sit here and, right where you are now, talk.
Colombo wanted to know if he ever talked about money, and she clearly is holding something back.
It's a lot better for you to tell me something now than to have to tell it in front of a jury later on.
In front of what?
I think you're a very honest person.
Thanks.
So then she goes on to share what Tony told her the other night.
Well, there's this gentleman that his wife was getting serious about. Tony said he made a living getting a suntan. 3 nights ago, Tony came in here and he said everything's going to be okay. Because the gentleman had agreed not to see Tony's wife ever again if Tony gave him $50,000.
Was Tony the kind of man that would arrange for a fake kidnapping to raise the money in order to break that trust? Because if he did, whoever helped him do it might be the man who killed him.
So basically, she just tells him she doesn't know any more than what she just said, and that she doesn't want to talk about Tony anymore.
I just never met another man my whole life who only wanted to talk.
Gloria West is played by Arlene Martell, born 1936 in New York. She was in a few episodes of Hogan's Heroes. She is most known by Star Trek fans as Spock's Vulcan bride. She also played opposite Robert Culp in an episode of The Outer Limits called Demon with a Glass Hand. We will see her in one more future Columbo episode, but she also has credit for being in another future episode that she is not in. I'll let you know when we get there. And she's clearly wearing a wig here too, although she's not the only one. If you remember Ray Milland's earlier role in Death Lends a Hand, he was pretty slick on top. A lot of people like to comment how awful his hairpiece looks, but I don't think it's that bad, is it? If you have never seen Ray Milland before this episode, would you say he's wearing a hairpiece? Maybe I'm just easily fooled, although I am suspicious about Bradford Dillman also wearing a wig. Well, Columbo leaves and Gloria suddenly thinks to call somebody.
Hello, sir. Is this you, Mr. Goodland, to whom I speak?
Yeah, that's how I usually greet people when I call them too. Now we're out in the marina. Columbo's trying to question Kathy, but all she can talk about is how much Columbo doesn't approve of her lifestyle when he has never said a word about it.
I told you before, I really don't care what you think.
About time. Where'd he come from?
Homicide, of course. Oh, they handle morals now. He's objecting to the places I go.
No, ma'am, that's not true.
She must feel very guilty deep down that she is constantly defensive about cheating on her husband.
It's just the night of the murder. That's all I want to ask about.
So you came down here to accuse me of murder?
No, ma'am.
I was out with Ken. We took a nice, long drive, and you can make whatever you like out of that.
Oh.
You know something, Mrs. Goodland? You're a very unusual person. You're not a hypocrite. And I'm not going to bother you anymore with these things.
And as Columbo's about to leave...
Oh, there's one little thing. You know, this is going to sound kind of silly, I guess. You see, somebody tried to convince me that you had a lover, Mrs. Goodland. Some guy with deep suntan. That he'd get out of your life forever if your husband gave him $50,000. I'm sure it's just malicious gossip, for what it's worth.
And by the look on Ken's face and the cartoonish gulp, this must have been true. Initially, this scene on the boat was written to be a bit longer, although I prefer this final cut more. But Latimer originally wrote into the scene that after Columbo lets Kathy know about the mysterious lover leaving her for $50,000, he goes to step off the boat but almost falls into the water until Kathy reaches out and grabs his arm to stop his fall. Columbo thanks her and she continues to hold his arm. She then glares at Ken and says, "Goodbye, Ken." Ken scowls at Columbo, slamming down a rag he was holding, and storms off the boat, never looking back. Columbo begins to apologize to Kathy, but she stops him and starts getting emotional, running down into the boat's cabin. The reason I prefer the final cut is because the confrontation between Ken and Kathy is left to our imaginations, and oftentimes our imaginations are much, much better. Moving right along, it is now nighttime. A 1965 Ford Thunderbird rolls up to Jarvis's house, and out comes Gloria. She rings the doorbell and waits about 1 second before checking the windows and then running to the back of the house into the dark night, trying to get killed or something. She walks into the greenhouse.
Solarium.
That is never locked, even though it leads right into Jarvis's billiards room, and she calls out for Mr. Goodland. I would love it if someone could give me a reason for why the alarm rang right here. other than to just startle the audience and Gloria.
Ah, Miss West, you said you wanted to speak to me alone.
Yes, sir. It's kind of spooky in here, isn't it?
I agree. Please turn on the lights, Jarvis. So Gloria says she saw Tony the other night and that Colombo was questioning her about him.
He thinks that maybe Tony's kidnapping wasn't a real kidnapping at all. Like maybe Tony did it himself to try to get some money out of his trust fund.
I suppose my nephew also murdered himself?
That was whoever helped Tony, I guess.
Jarvis wants to know why she came to him with all this absurd nonsense. Gloria says she heard on the radio that Tony was killed with a .32 caliber gun, and she remembered Tony saying he gave away a .32 caliber gun.
And I remember now who he told me he gave it to.
And who was that, Miss West?
His wife.
Jarvis, please explain to me what you were planning to do here. Pretend she was a burglar and shoot her? Probably. Also, it's interesting to learn that Tony likes to give guns away as gifts, because we learned earlier that he gave Uncle Jarvis his gun, and now we just learned that he gave his wife her gun.
Maybe she and Tony planned the kidnapping together. So after the ransom was paid, she brought in her boyfriend and killed him. And she gets the estate and nobody's the wiser, except me.
Gloria goes on to say that the radio announced there would be a $30,000 reward for anyone who helps get the ransom money back.
And I'm claiming it.
Jarvis says he's got to make some phone calls.
I'll be in touch.
And now Jarvis is like, yes, phase 4. Suddenly we see Kathy asleep in bed and Jarvis at her door. How did he get in here? Does he have a key to her house? I suppose that's possible. Well, he walks across the room with his gun drawn. Then we hear some rustling and Jarvis points the gun at her, but she's still asleep. What if she did wake up? Then what was he gonna do? Shoot her? How could he possibly explain why he broke into her house in the middle of the night and shot her?
Well, it was after 11, and I woke up. It was pitch dark. I reached for the gun, and then I just started shooting. I didn't know what I was doing.
So Jarvis takes one of her bags of shoes and hides the gun inside while Kathy is still sleeping dramatically. Then he goes directly to her desk drawer and grabs Kathy's gun as she begins to sit up in bed and then lies back down. Man, it's no wonder Tony had his own room. How could anyone sleep next to someone who romps around in bed all night? Also, since Jarvis somehow knew exactly where Kathy kept her gun, why didn't he just swap them rather than hiding his? Oh, and finishing off phase 4, he goes and hides the bag that had the ransom money in it. Jarvis arrives at his solarium, takes out Kathy's gun, and is relieved and positive he did the right thing. Then we hear sirens and Wilson pops into the never-locked solarium.
Now, I would appreciate it if you'd hand this gun to your ballistics experts.
I don't understand.
Jarvis explains to Wilson that when Colombo learned he had a .32 caliber gun, he immediately leapt to accusations that it could be the gun that killed Tony.
Now, I resent that implication, Sergeant.
Different officers do have their different methods. I must say the lieutenant's investigatory procedures do differ somewhat from my own.
Jarvis explains to Wilson that he has heard things that cast a completely different light on his nephew's death. Things so incredible he can hardly believe it.
Let's go into the house, shall we?
It's time now for Jarvis to complete phase 5. Now a new scene of an outdoor diner, and in the background is a shopping bag food store. I wanted to be able to find this location today, but shopping bag stores were all sold to Albertsons, and I couldn't find any addresses of old locations. As we pan to the left, we get a glimpse of the inside wall of this eating establishment, and they seem to like boats and barns. Continuing our pan, we find Colombo.
How do you want your chili, Lieutenant? With or without beans?
Last night I had it with beans. I had without beans. Variety.
Lieutenant, what are you doing here?
Oh, just ordering some chili.
Wilson asks Colombo if he got his report on the Jarvis Goodland statement. And keep your eye on this long-haired lady in the background talking to the policeman in the car. She talks continuously, but looks up at us every once in a while. I'm supposed to check to see if the scene is still going on.
I found that very interesting. That gun he gave you? Checked out okay with ballistics, huh?
Sure, of course.
Wilson claims Jarvis has cracked the case for them.
I have a search warrant and 2 units right here ready to go.
Wilson guarantees they will find the murder weapon at Kathy's house.
You really think so? Tell you what, go ahead on your own. You find anything, you let me know.
Wilson is so excited to be let loose and take control of the situation. And if you watch, the lady's gonna get out of the way now.
Charlie, pull her out!
Colombo gets his chili, which looks a little thin.
Who's that?
Wilson? Very nice fella. Been a big help to me on this case.
Now we're at Kathy's house.
The pistol's right here where I always keep it.
Would you take it out for us, please?
What isn't here?
I can see that.
What's this all about, Sergeant?
The murder of your husband, Mrs. Goodland.
And now the search warrant is being put to use. Later, Jarvis shows up at Kathy's house. And he showed up just in time because here comes Wilson with something very important.
You recognize this?
Well, yes, it was Tony's.
And this?
Tony's?
And how about this? The ransom bag.
I like how Wilson put the bag back inside the other cases before presenting it to Kathy for that suspenseful dramatic effect. Kathy is super confused, and Wilson is about to read Kathy her rights, but Jarvis steps in and says it looks like the ransom bag, but he can't positively identify it. Wilson says if there's anything else in this house, they are going to find it.
Sergeant, for my money, that pistol is long gone.
Grover, you and I know that a pro drops the gun immediately, but we're dealing with amateurs.
Grover is played by Robert Carnes, born 1917 in California. He wasn't exclusively an uncredited actor, but a lot of his parts were uncredited, like in the films The Best Years of Our Lives, Gentleman's Agreement, All of the King's Men, and From Here to Eternity. He was also in several episodes of The Lawless Years and Gunsmoke. We'll see him once more in a future Columbo episode.
Nothing.
Nothing.
This metal detector guy is played by George Sawaya, born 1923 in California. We already met him in Short Fuse as the guy in charge of remodeling Uncle David's office for Roger. And we will see him one last time a few seasons from now.
What about this area over here? Did you go over this?
Yeah, we've been through it twice already, Sergeant.
We'll go over it again. So what's that?
Grover is very eager to explain this.
Shoes with metal trees in them, Sergeant. That's all. That's what's making the buzzing.
Okay. Wait a minute. Did you open all of these?
Then Wilson realizes that Grover believes one shoe with a metal tree must mean all shoes have a metal tree, and then he has them get their passive rear ends back in here to check all the shoe bags. And look at Grover's face. It's that annoyed look you get when Mom tells you to make your bed and you just fling the blankets across it and she tells you to get back in there and make it properly. So they all three start tossing shoes on the floor, and then Wilson has found his golden ticket and is so excited, but maintains his newfound authority.
Crime lab, pronto. Have ballistics check the pistol against the 2 bullets they've got, then call me, understand? Step on it.
Now we are back at Jarvis's house. He walks through his front door and into his billiards room to get a drink, but then he hears a sound in his solarium.
What the devil are you doing here?
Oh, just sort of killing time, looking around.
The gardener probably said he could wait in here. But if Jarvis would just lock his door to this place, he wouldn't have so many problems. Colombo says there's been a new development in the case.
Things certainly look bad for her.
They certainly do, sir.
Colombo says he's waiting on a lab report to straighten out a few things, and then Colombo changes the subject.
You have a real green thumb, sir. This African violet of my wife's, you know there's actually a flower growing out of there. Now, I don't know what you did. That's a miracle.
He probably just watered it. But Jarvis has had enough of Colombo.
Now, will you please take your African violet and get out of here?
Wait a minute.
Then we hear a car pull up outside.
Lieutenant, I don't understand. I was halfway downtown with Mrs. Goodland when we were ordered back here.
Sergeant, has this lady actually been arrested?
Wilson was ready to get the gas chambers fired up for Kathy.
Sir, I phoned my report into Captain Ritchie. He was quite complimentary. She'll be charged as soon as we...
No, Sergeant. No.
Then here comes Grover, the man Colombo was waiting for. Colombo opens the folder, reads the report, and takes out some bullets.
This one is from the wrecked car, 32 caliber. This one is from the body of the victim, also 32 caliber.
Wilson says yes, both of those came from the gun that came from her house, which has been proven to be the murder weapon.
That's quite right. Sergeant, I don't want you to feel badly, because without you, I'd never gotten this idea.
Colombo's so nice, reassuring Wilson. He says he never used a metal detector before and found that it really works. Then he reaches back into the folder and pulls out another item.
Third bullet, also a 32 caliber, and also proven by ballistics to have been fired by the same weapon that fired the first 2 bullets. I found this third bullet buried here in this pile of dirt.
Colombo figures it must have been from when he fired at the burglar a year ago.
I don't know how you're going to explain, sir, how the same gun that fired this bullet in the dirt ended up tonight in Mrs. Goodland's dressing room.
Colombo instructs Wilson to take Jarvis downtown.
Mr. Jarvis Goodland, it's my duty to inform you that anything you might, this way, sir.
Colombo walks over to Kathy Goodland and asks if he can drive her home.
Thank you, Lieutenant.
Then he remembers his wife's African violet and goes back for it.
If I forget this, my wife will kill me.
I know this is supposed to be funny, but he says it to someone whose husband just got killed, so... Anyway, the episode's over. Having a little glance at the end credits here, there is a credit for Peggy Mondo, who played Woman. But did you see her? Did you ever see her? I never saw her. I wish I could shed a little light on why her name is here. We can assume, of course, that her scene was cut out or something. But why did they not fix their credits then? This happened in Murder by the Book as well with Marcia Wallace. But at least Marcia does show up in a later episode in Lady in Waiting. To my knowledge, Peggy Mondo is never in a Columbo episode, but I'll keep watching for her just in case. Well, The Greenhouse Jungle has extremely mixed reviews from people, which is very interesting. But many complain about Ray Milland's Jarvis character with his monotone insults. I'm kind of indifferent on the subject. There are people who complain about the gotcha for some reason, but I like it. I still remember the very first time I saw this episode because of the gotcha. I was like, third bullet? What third bullet? Where did that third bullet... Oh... Because they don't really dwell on the fact that Jarvis shooting the dirt meant there is a bullet waiting for Colombo to find in there. I also appreciate there being room for focusing on the wrong suspect in this episode. This is very rare. Though we had to hire Sergeant Wilson to do this because Colombo is nonchalantly looking at Jarvis the whole time. Speaking of Sergeant Wilson, I really enjoyed his character. Peter Falk was the one who insisted on using Bob Dishy for the part of Sergeant Wilson. They were actually acting buddies when they lived in New York. And even though Dishy performed his role perfectly in this episode, the producers weren't in any kind of a hurry to ask his character back for what I suppose is a valid reason. Basically, the contrast of the two characters, Colombo and Sergeant Wilson, becoming repetitive and transforming the formula that we all love. Even though I am glad the producers were concerned about that, I really think Sergeant Wilson should have come back at least once per season, but we'll only get to see him one more time. One of my complaints about the episode is the title, actually. The Greenhouse Jungle. Why is it called that? It's not even comparable to the great titles that have come before it. Typically the titles have death or murder in them, or the title is a play on words that relate to the episode. Maybe they could have called it The Greenhouse Murder. But we learned there isn't even a greenhouse involved here, which makes the real title make even less sense. So how about Cultivating Death? Or Solarium Sins of Death. Okay, I'll stop. But if you're feeling creative, please come up with a new title for this episode and share it with me. I'll pick my favorites and make a post about it or something. Well, I must admit, even though I think Peter Falk's Columbo was top-notch in this episode, maybe even one of his best Columbo performances, I'm still rating Greenhouse Jungle 4 cigars out of 5. Now to try and explain why. I think it's just the story overall. It's not that interesting. Along with the characters, none of them are very interesting to me, with the exception of Sergeant Wilson. His thoroughness and enthusiasm is quite comical. And of course, I already said, Columbo's character was perfect in this episode.
Captain Ritchie, he said that?
About you? Oh, repeatedly, sir.
So, Columbo's perfect, Sergeant Wilson was perfect, everybody else was very uninteresting. But don't get me wrong here, 4 cigars isn't a bad rating, you know. I would describe The Greenhouse Jungle as more of a playful episode. I like it. It can make me laugh. And laughter is one of my favorite things.
Fine.